Hey y'all. Hey Danny.
Hey.
Listen, this conversation right here, I'm super excited to have. Number one, because we've never had it. That's number one. Number two, the reason I'm so excited to have this conversation, because there are so many, especially if you go on the gram, and whether it's a toxic place for you or a place of empowerment for you, when you go on the gram, you can be bombarded sometimes with a lot of body positive folks or folks who kind of are downright nasty and mean with bodies that aren't as mainstream or traditional, as we like to say. So this conversation is going to be centered around how you can become so liberated in your body that you allow it to be used as a tool or and I don't want to say a weapon, but just as a force for good. And so I'm super, super excited to have Chrissy King, author and speaker, on today's call. And we are going to go ahead and bring her in. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. We're so excited to have you and have this conversation because there aren't many conversations we haven't had yet. So I'm really excited for this one because it's something that I think needs some clarity, especially in the Black community, and just I think with women, period. We don't really control the narrative of our bodies, unfortunately, for some reason in 2023. So thank you so much for joining us for this. And our favorite question to ask all of our guests, just to kind of dive right in, because you are obviously accomplished and we want to know, outside of all your titles and your accolades, who do you say that you are?
Oh, I love this question. And I think it's such a great question because so often we lead with like who we are as being the thing that we do in the world.
Yes.
And what I think of in my like who I am is I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a friend. But really at my essence and my core, I think of myself, this is very esoteric, by the way, I'm just going to tell you exactly how it is, but at my essence and my core, I just think of myself as a soul that's here fulfilling their purpose and mission in this world. And I think that my work as a writer and the message of body liberation is part of my purpose in this lifetime.
I always get excited when folks are like, just let me let you know from the beginning, this is who I am. I love that, especially my esoteric folks, because it's like you're able to go to a place that most people kind of stray away from, because to get to the heart of the matter or the soul of the matter, better yet, requires you to tell yourself some pretty hard truths. It requires you to love on a level that is so deeply liberating, that it changes things for not only you, but also for those that get to experience you. So one of the things when we were, reading the book and going through your story, one of the primary things that stood out for us is how challenging and how difficult it has been, especially historically, to love a body that goes against that Eurocentric standard of beauty. Historically, if you had full lips, or if you had, a full butt, or if you were too tall, and I put those, in air quotes, or if your body was just different, if you were, if you had full breasts, that was something that you should not be proud of, and something that you should change. So how do you believe like that standard, how has that affected like the lens from which we view ourselves? And then two, how can we learn to love ourselves in spite of what's constantly being pushed on us?
Absolutely. I think, what you're talking to, especially for Black women and other women of color, growing up with some of these features that haven't always been praised or deemed as beautiful, when we're thinking about Eurocentric standards of beauty, has always been harmful for us. And then we fast forward to times in history, like recently, right? We're in the age of like the BBL, where we're seeing this body popularized by folks who were in non-Black bodies. And now being like, oh, this is the standard. Now it's beautiful. And it's like, oh, it's beautiful when someone else tries it on. And then when they decide they don't want it anymore, they're like, okay, we're done with that body type. And, the New York Post just recently posted it. Let me just take it off now, right? And the New York Post recently did an article saying like BBLs are out and heroin chic is back in. And not only is that narrative just problematic for a lot of reasons, it's inherently racist because once again, it is saying that some people, those of us who were born with this body that now has been popularized, like we can just discard it when it's no longer useful for people.
It's like a costume.
Like it's a costume that you can just try on and like, I'm tired of it now. I'm gonna get done with. I'm gonna be done with that. And I think when we're faced with Eurocentric standards of beauty, and then we're getting all these other messages about what's the in body, it's really hard to come to this place where you love and appreciate the body that you reside in, because all of us have different bodies naturally. Genetics is like, that's just the reality of that, and we come in all different shapes and sizes. And so, how do we combat those messages on a day-to-day basis when you know that those messages are, for one, very intentional? The diet industry is like a $72+ billion industry for a reason, because the longer they can make us feel insecure about the bodies we live in, the more they can profit from those insecurities by selling us the thing that will fix us. And so it's like, how do we navigate living in this world while also understanding that these things aren't true? And when I talk about body liberation, one of the things I talk about that I think is really important is this idea that when we are working towards healing our relationship with body image, it's not a one and done situation. It's something that is a lifelong journey, and we'll continue working forward towards, especially because we're going to keep getting these messages that tell us there's something wrong with us.
Yeah. And I think that it's really one of those things that it's a mindset thing, right? It's like, obviously they know how to manipulate our minds, but we have to also take ownership of our own minds, knowing that if our minds don't change, then nothing else will change, right? Like, they're going to keep doing what they're going to keep doing, right? The advertisers, like all those things, that's not going anywhere, and it's only getting worse, and they're only more in our heads, in our phones, in our homes, so it's very difficult to not have it infiltrate us and impact us and influence us and manipulate us. And with you talking about the rise of diet culture, and not even just BBLs, but other quick fix surgeries, lipo, and these are things that, if that's something you feel like you need to do for you, then more power to you. But they are like a quick fix solution to kind of like, it's easy to think that fixing what you believe is wrong on the outside is somehow going to heal whatever's on the inside. Like we have that kind of a quick fix mentality, instant gratification mentality, especially with our bodies, with access that only a certain demographic had access to, even just 20 years ago. Like, people weren't getting surgeries like that. Like, that wasn't something that you just did as a normal person with a 9-to-5 making, 5 figures a year. Like, it's just like, we have so much access now to things that we wouldn't have had access to. And I think because our mentalities are so, I don't want to say poison, because I think that's a strong word. Maybe it's the right word. But I think that we're so influenced by media, by social media, by all the things, it's very difficult to kind of know how you really feel about yourself for real. Like, you're kind of like always questioning. Like, I know sometimes I'll go on Instagram, I'm like, girls look like this? Like, your girls always look like this? Or did they just start looking like this yesterday? Because these women are beautiful, or their bodies are flawless. And it's just so, it can be, no matter how confident you are, you can still have your moments of like, damn, like, I need to get my shit together. So I wanted to know, how can those who want to make a lifestyle change shift their mindset for real, like with long-term results? And how do we kind of put our minds in a space to kind of withstand the constant rhetoric that is not made to make us feel good about ourselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing that's really important, especially with social media, I feel like has amplified all of these things for us, because it is everywhere, right? Like, we're seeing it in our faces. Like, we always saw it in like the media, and we saw it, magazine covers, but now we have it all on our phone right there all day long, right? You just open up your app and you're seeing all the things. And so I think for me, what's really important is trying to curate my feed as much as I possibly can, meaning like being mindful of who I'm following, because at least on Instagram, right, we have control of who we're seeing come across our news feed. So being mindful of like who I'm following, and also like prioritizing my own mental health, meaning like if I'm following content that makes me feel triggered about my own body image or about the way I look or about my size, then that doesn't even mean the person is doing something wrong. It just means that's not content that I personally need to consume right now. And so maybe I put that person on mute, or maybe I unfollow. And that doesn't mean that like I have anything against that person. It just means like I know where I am with my body image issues right now, and I want to protect my peace as much as possible. So I think that's one thing that's really important. I think also like, as you start down this journey of saying, I want to like divest from diet culture and I want to heal my relationship with body image, it's also like really important who we surround ourselves with in our lives as well, right? Because there's some things that we are always going to see. We're going to see ads on TV. We're going to see the billboards when we're driving down the street. So a lot of those things may be out of our control, but what we can control is the people that we're spending our time with. And so I think, really having open and honest conversations with people and saying like, this is something that I'm working on. So I'm really working to eliminate diet talk from my conversations. And I'm really working on, trying to heal my relationship with food. So it's really harmful when you like make judgmental comments about my food or make comments about my body. And so I want us to continue to be in good relationship with one another. So I'm going to ask you that we can have these boundaries about what we talk about when we are spending time together. And I think that is very vulnerable sometimes to have these conversations with people. But if we are in a society in which diet culture is literally the air we breathe, then we need to create as many safe spaces for ourselves as we can. And to your point, Danny, it's like, there's some things we can't control, but we do have control over some of those things. And it's like, how can I try to control the things that I can control as much as possible? And that looks like, where am I putting metrics in place where it is within my control?
Yeah, I really like that too. One of the most dangerous things you can do is have people around you who refuse to respect your boundaries and who constantly present to you their concerns. And yes, I use air quotes again, their concerns in ways that make you feel worse about what you're experiencing. If I told you this is something that I'm working through and working on, I really don't need you to air out your concerns and your care for me each time we're speaking. I personally don't believe that quick fixes are something that are effective, not long term. Yes, it makes, you get that instant thing, but what I have seen time and time again is you get the quick fix, but because your mind has not changed, you shift right back, whether it's an immediate shift or whether it's a shift in a couple of months, you go back and sometimes you revert back even worse than what you were because we were so focused on how do I get there super quick? How do I do that? And then when you have terms like, high value man and a high value woman, which I don't know if I disliked the term before, but I definitely don't like it now. It can seem as though our worth is tied to how we look, not necessarily who we are or our essence or what and I even don't like bring to the table, but I'm going to use it, but what we bring to the table. So what are some of the steps that we can take to begin to repair our sense of worth, especially if we are outside of the status quo or things are not perfect and we feel like we want all these changes and adjustments? What are those like?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I say in the book is that for a lot of us, we have tied our self-worth and our worthiness to our external appearance, right? What we look like. And again, I think it's a nuanced conversation because we do live in a world in which there is social capital assigned to looking a certain way. And so that's like a real thing. But at the end of the day, that is not, one of the things I talk about is that we are all inherently worthy because we exist and it has nothing to do with what we look like. And so I also do not like the term high value man or high value woman. I think it's really harmful. And I think it's just like focus on your worthiness being attached to, like you said, like what you look like, how much money you make, what you quote unquote bring to the table. And so I think one of the exercises I have in the book is when we are like really working to divest from this idea that our worthiness is based on what we look is actually, it's a really jarring question, but to step back and really take the time to ask yourself, like, what am I deriving my worth from? And in a society that's inherently capitalistic and inherently fat phobic and inherently like driven by like social capital, it's really easy to start tying your worth to productivity, to how much money you make, to what you look like. And so as a first step, I always ask people to like take stock and like have an honest conversation with yourself with curiosity and compassion, of course, and really begin to think like when I'm thinking about what makes me worthy, what are the things that, what do I believe at my core is actually the thing that makes me worthy? And when we start to kind of like untangle those things and start to think through them, we can, for one, get like an understanding of where you are individually, and then start to understand, okay, well, I know that all of these things that like, for example, if you are basing your worthiness on what you look like, what we know to be true is that bodies change because they were in fact designed and created to do that from the time we are born to the time we leave this physical plane,
Yeah.
the fact of the matter is our bodies are going to change, and they were designed to do that. And so for a lot of us, we get caught in this idea that like this ideal body that I have right now is the body that I want to stay in forever. And it's just not possible for any of us to choose that for ourselves. Our skin is going to sag, we're going to get wrinkles, our body is going to change. And so the sooner we can come to a place of acceptance with that is also the sooner we can move towards liberation. Because like if we are deriving our worthiness simply on how we look, it's impossible to feel worthy because this physical vessel, like I always say, this vessel is just the thing that's allowing us to have this human experience. And this vessel is going to change regardless if we want to or not.
Yeah. And you can see the people that are like hanging on for dear life to their youth. And it never looks that much like, I don't feel like it looks better than what if you just looked like if you just allowed yourself to age gracefully. Like there are different things coming out now, like about your telomeres and like ways to lengthen them. And they're like indicators in your cells that determine like what age you really are like on the inside. So, I mean, there are ways to kind of keep a youthfulness. And so much of that has to do with your own spirit and your energy and how well you take care of yourself. But again, we're so focused on just the outside that we're having facelifts and all the things and fillers and all the things that we try to like hang on for dear life. And I think one of the things is culturally, age is not respected anymore. Like, like older, like back in the day, like you revered older women. Like it was an honor to live a long time. They were seen as pillars of wisdom and strength in the community. And now older people are like, who cares? Like they're just so overlooked in society. And I think that trickles down into how we feel about ourselves because we're all inevitably, hopefully, we're lucky enough actually to get older. It's such a thing. Yeah. And we because I think of how we treat the elderly in our community, especially in America, it kind of trickles into our youth as to how we see ourselves and what we think about age and what it's going to do to us. I wanted to kind of, Alicia was talking about like the term high value man. There's another term I wanted to talk about because it's also quite the buzzword right now, which is body shaming. And it seems like especially if you're on social media, that everyone is like an expert, right? Like everyone has an opinion and they're really determined to share it and they know what they're talking about and they can't just keep scrolling, right? Like they have to say something, they have to stop and they have to voice their opinion, right? And it's everyone. You talk about bodies changing, even me as a new mom, from new moms to Lizzo, there can be a lot of judgment, I feel like, around women's bodies and what they should look like and be allowed to do. And I know that there are people who may fit whatever the status quo body type is, or even men that just don't really fully understand like what it is we experience as women. So how can people advocate for women and the respect that they deserve for the full control of their bodies? Because I think that there are people that just don't understand and they don't even know that they need to understand to care to do something to help advocate for it.
I think the number one thing we can all do when it comes to bodies is to, number one, just like refrain from commenting on other people's bodies, period, unless they're our own, because they're really, and you're right, like you go, no matter who you are, someone is going to have, especially on the internet, is going to have an opinion about, and they feel like they have to say that opinion on the internet, right? And so
it's a must.
It's a must.
It's
you have to
in
tell the person how. And their day would be incomplete if they didn't tell you that. And so I think all of us, it's so interesting because behind the computer screen, behind, whatever, the phone, people say things to you that they would probably not say to you in real life because they feel like there's this anonymity. But I think all of us would serve each other very well to just, number one, stop commenting on people's bodies. It's a tall order for the whole world to do, but I think that will help all of us is to really stop the conversation around bodies that are not our own.
I have a quick question because it pertains to that. Does that include compliments? Like, because like sometimes people feel like they're saying something complimentary to you, or they're saying something that should make you feel better about yourselves with a comment on your body. Oh, you lost some weight. You look good. What you been doing, girl? Or, oh, like your arms are looking good. Or like they make a comment about your body in good faith that is going to help lift your spirits or make you feel better about what journey you're on.
Yeah, so in the book, I actually am really clear on, I think that no compliment is the right thing, no comment is the right thing, because even when we're giving someone this statement of like, oh my gosh, you look so great, did you lose weight? What you're saying is like, you think they look better now that they're smaller, right? So that when we're thinking about how we think about bodies, the underlying bias we already have is that your body, you look so great because it's in a smaller body now.
Okay.
Regardless, so I'm really like pro not commenting at all. And the other part about that, the other reason I say I'm really pro not commenting at all is because, again, because we have all been conditioned to like diet culture and anti-fat bias, we all assume that if someone is smaller, then that means they're getting healthier, right? But in actuality, someone can be smaller because they're suffering with a chronic illness, or they're suffering with depression, or an eating disorder, right? Or grief. Like it could be all these things. And so it's like when we make these assumptions that this is a positive thing happening in your life because your body is shrinking, it's inherently biased. And also like we just don't know what's going on with people. So for me, my whole thing is like, let's just stay away from commenting on people's bodies, because we just can't look at someone and tell what's going on. And then the other thing I was going to say, talking about like how we can do better as a society, is also like there's a very big hyper focus on the bodies of women in particular, right? Like anybody, yes, we're judging society in general, but we are super judging when it comes to women's bodies. And so
Yeah,
thinking
especially
about
lawmakers,
people like
they get really excited about all the things.
excited about making decisions about bodies that they don't live in, right? And then also just
Oh, yeah.
thinking about like people like, I always use example like Serena Williams, right? Arguably one of the best athletes in all of history. And the conversation so often is about what her body looks like, what she's wearing, how she's behaving, and men don't deal with that. I've never heard someone talk about Michael Jordan and talk about what his body looks like, right? Or like, was he too like, aggressive while he was playing? And so I think that in terms of like the way that women's bodies are hypersexualized, and like literally how the government is trying to take control of what we actually do with our bodies, is something that, regardless of your gender or gender identity, we all need to be fighting for that, because a loss of freedom for any of us is a loss of freedom for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because it's kind of like a slippery slope, and that's always been my thing when it comes to the control piece. Now, Danny will tell you, and anyone who's ever listened to this podcast knows, I am a staunch believer in having my freedom. I do not like it to be restricted. Of course, I understand that there are some things that should be kind of hard stops, like maybe you shouldn't drive 100 miles an hour in a 40-mile, zone. Like, there are things that are common sense, but things that have to do with control of my personal freedoms, it's a hard stop. Hell no for me. Thanks, but no thanks. And so when it does come to like finding like that actual freedom in our bodies, because for some it can be a challenge learning to love yourself at every stage and phase of your evolution, because like we were saying earlier, the body constantly and consistently changes. It is the one constant, because even if, let's say, you begin to work out quite a bit, it'll change then. And then let's say you stop working out. Okay, it'll make some more changes. Let's say, you gain some weight or you lose some weight, or you experience, sicknesses or difficulties or challenges. Change is inevitable. From the wrinkles to the graying of the hair. I found a few more gray hairs the other day, and I was like, okay, how am I going to feel about this? And I need to go ahead and make sure I schedule this laser appointment, because once it's all gray, I cannot get it done. And so finding like that actual freedom in our bodies, and doing so, through finding strength and like aspects of like maybe fitness or movement, and even eating for what works for you, because it is not the same for everybody. Like, what truly inspired you to start this movement? And then how has it impacted your own life?
I think what inspired me to start this movement is that, speaking of like wanting to change your body, I spent like nearly a decade of my life yo-yo dieting and because I was doing things that were unsustainable, right? And over exercising and under eating and like doing all the things. And I was just so obsessed for so long about being smaller. And I think, I reached this point where I was in the smallest body I'd ever been in as an adult. I was the physically strongest I'd ever been as an adult. And I was also the most miserable I had ever been as an adult, right? So it's like the thing that diet culture tells us is that like on the other side of weight loss, when you get the quote unquote body of your dreams, that you're going to be happier, right? You're going to find the partner of your dreams, the career of your dreams, like everything that you desire is on the other side of fat loss. And in actuality, everything that you're dealing with is still there on the other side of fat loss. You're just in a smaller body. And so what I recognized is that I was I was living in a body in which I got constant external validation from people. So you would think I'm like, oh, I've achieved the thing. I've done the thing I wanted to do. But in actuality, it was always like, oh, I need to lose 5 more pounds, or now I need to change this part of my body, and now I need to fix this thing. And I recognized it was like a never ending cycle, and I was going to be miserable for the rest of my life if I stayed in that place. And so that's what really not even inspired me. I think that's the point I call like my rock bottom. I was like, oh, I don't want to spend the rest of my life like this. Like, I didn't want to go to do social things with friends. I didn't want to go on vacation. I didn't want to do anything in which I couldn't control exactly what I was eating and my workout schedule. And I realized that that's not living life either. Like that actually is very destructive. It's very destructive. My mental health was in a bad place. And so I was like, oh, okay, there's something that has to change here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I wanted to kind of dissect, or maybe you can kind of inform, especially our listeners, because some of us come from cultures where it is very normal to comment on the body, and it's not like an offensive thing. Like, I'm Jamaican, and like my uncle has a name for everyone based on how they look, you know? And in Jamaican culture, it's just not something that is thought about. It's not something that anyone takes as seriously. And it is a culture thing. Like, in different cultures, you'll find that American culture is a little bit more sensitive to the kind of things that people say to them and things like that. So it is something that I know is cultural, and a lot of people just don't understand. And sometimes I think for me, the confusion comes in, especially working as a wellness coach, is when you do see that someone's health is affected, based on their weight and things like that. Like, I think for me, sometimes the frustration comes in where you're not supposed to say anything, even if you see that someone's health is at risk here. Like, no matter how we want to cut it, like, being obese is something that is problematic for you in the long run, especially as you age. There's issues with your heart. There's issues with fat building up. Fatty liver is the number one rising disease in America right now. Fatty liver disease, where there's little fat in your liver. And sometimes I feel like this idea that you're just not saying anything ever about anything and everything's okay. And it's like, yes, love your body through the process, but I also think it can create this delusion that there's nothing wrong with anyone ever. And we're dropping dead in America because of obesity rates. They say 50% of Americans will be obese in the next 10 years. So what should that conversation be? Or what would you say the conversation should start looking like to protect people who are on this journey, so that they're honored in their journey and they're not insulted or ridiculed, but they're also being helped to kind of make the changes that they need to make, because it's like a really delicate balance.
Yeah, I mean, I think my opinion on this is that, number one, I think the only person's health we're truly responsible for is our own. And so, and I think that, also, there's a lot of things, right? When we're thinking about what is health, there's lots of metrics of health. And I think that a lot of us have the assumption that if, for example, very seldom do we look at someone in a thinner body and are concerned about their health, right? And I always give the example of like eating, for example. When we see someone in a larger body eating what we consider junk food, our number one thing is like, oh, I'm not concerned about what you look like. I just want you to be healthy. I'm concerned about your health, right? And I think that is coming from a well-intentioned place for a lot of people. On the flip side, when we look at a lot of times the commentary around someone in a smaller body eating quote unquote junk food, the conversation is, oh, I'm so jealous. I wish I could eat everything like you and not gain weight. And so what I think we have to also really be mindful of is that, number one thing I always say is that we cannot look at someone and determine what their health is, right? Someone can be in a smaller body and be having heart health issues and all these other issues as well, just like someone in a larger body can. So I think that's the number one thing I always tell people, is that we simply can't look at someone and determine what their metrics of health are, or, if they're in danger. And then secondly, the other thing I would say is that when it comes to our loved ones and having concern for people around us, of course we have concern for people around us. I think that's all legitimate. But I always come back to the place that I don't personally believe that we can shame someone into creating a healthier lifestyle habits, right? And I think that oftentimes one of the issues in the medical industry too is that but doctors always assume that a person's health issues are always caused by their weight, when in fact there's a multitude of the illnesses that could be leading to some of the health issues. And so when we're thinking about like body positivity and body liberation, it's not so much that we just like throw caution to the wind. It's that we understand that, number one, we're all worthy and deserving of respect, and that we can't make assumptions about people's health. And that size in itself is not an indicator of a person's health, right? And yes, there are studies that say there are increased risks of these factors, but there's increased risk of a lot of factors for people in a lot of bodies. And we also need to be thinking about like more, there's so many determinants of health besides just weight, like accessibility to healthy food, to like, you know, fresh produce and groceries, and like food deserts are a whole issue, and like access to healthcare in general, which is like, you know, really important for preventing illness. And so when we're thinking about health, I think we're looking also at like holistic systems, and not just as weight being the one factor that is negatively impacting people.
Very, very true. I think for me, it boils down to, especially so in my family, there is a lot of obesity. So for me, I don't usually address the size because that's not my place, especially because they usually look at it, oh, well, you're skinny, so what do you know? And so for me, I always come from a place of, hey, I'm going to cook you a meal that I personally know is really healthy and also tastes good, because a lot of times, at least in my family, the issue is, well, I don't want nothing that looks healthy, sounds healthy, is healthy, because it's going to be nasty. And so I just take it as an opportunity to introduce, you know, sometimes they don't like it. Like I let Danny try some of my vegan crackers. She was like, hell no, we won't go. She hated it. That's fine. I happen to like it. But it's simply introducing, hey, these are other options. Like my mother loves bacon. I was like, hey, most turkey bacon is disgusting. These are 2 brands I found that actually taste really, really good. I was like, because I don't want you to feel like you can't have the things, or you can have pizza, but instead of getting it from Pizza Hut, let's try this mom and pop place that uses, you know, organic cheeses or different types of, you know, tomatoes, because I don't want you to feel like everything is being stripped from you, because nobody wants to live like that. But here are some better food options that can help you, since you are consistently complaining about health. So for me, that's how I will offer assistance if there's a constant complaint about health. And because I know obesity just is a thing in my family, and not just larger bodies, but just like actually being very, very ill and dying kind of young unnecessarily. So I was, okay, well, let's try out these different restaurants, or let's try out these different ways to cook foods and different oils that we can use. And food deserts are a lot of times a problem, especially because my mother lives in one. And so to get to a place that has fresh organic fruit, not only is it higher once you get there, but it also takes 25 minutes to get to the store, and everybody doesn't have a car. So for us, it was like, okay, well, what can I order you to drop off at the house? So for me, if you really are saying that you want to help, there are ways to do it in way they don't feel like you're constantly judging them, because there's a parable, and Danny, don't laugh at me. A brother once offended is harder to be won than a strong city. She laughs because she's like, I'm always quoting Bible scriptures and I want nothing to do with religion. But I do believe there are parables that are of value, like that one. Once you offend somebody, being able to help them goes literally, let's say you were maybe at a 10 before, you at a -1 once you've offended them. So I feel like to answer Danny's question, or just to add to it, it all depends on the how you're introducing it, and don't focus on, the weight. Focus on, hey, these are just some other alternatives to still eat how you want to eat, but maybe to do so not necessarily in a restrictive type of moderation, because I don't think that's good for anybody either, but just in ways where you still eat what you want. You just do so using different ingredients, at least in my belief. I'm not sure how, what your thoughts are around that, Chrissy.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you said I really appreciate and I think is important is, especially if people are coming to you and saying, I'm worried about my own personal health, like you said, like asking that person, how can I support you in this journey? right? So it's not about me telling you what I think you need to do. It's like, how do you want to be supported, and how can I add to your journey towards health, whatever that means to you personally.
For sure.
And,
For sure.
speaking about family and, a lot of these ideas and complexes we have around our body image do begin in childhood, right? Whether it's watching your parents on diets and doing things, or them making commentary about your body. I know I grew up seeing a family member that I think they've tried just about every diet you can think of, and every diet pill and every B12 shot and just all the things, and it was just like, God, like it'll work to fit in this dress, but then in 6 months you're back to this weight that you feel like is undesirable. So it's like you see things in childhood, whether it's personally affecting you or you're observing the adults around you kind of have their own struggles when it comes to weight in their body and how they feel about themselves. It's not even just weight. I mean, you can have someone that feels like, especially if you're in like a community where the women are curvier, their butt's not big enough, or you're around women that have a larger chest and you're like, damn, my boobs are so small compared to theirs. Like, I mean, there's so many comparisons and issues you can have around body image just from watching other people or from being in an environment that they do constantly comment on your body. Like I said, I have an uncle where everybody's name is based on how he thinks they look. And not all the names are that kind, right? It's like, and I've always just watched like, oh my, like, and he's still, like old school Jamaicans, like he's just gonna come to America and call you whatever you want to call you. And you're just like, oh, okay, like, all right. So I've always just like observed that as like, and even as a child, I was like, oh my gosh, that is like not a nice thing to say to somebody, because I'll know the struggle that person is experiencing based on how they feel about themselves. And then you come in with what you want to call a nickname or a term of endearment, not realizing that you are just like throwing them deeper into this space that they don't want to be in. So I was curious because, like I said, I feel like all these things start in childhood. What would you tell your younger self today, or just any younger person, period, that may be on this journey to self-love and kind of just fully understanding this body that they're in, and so that they can appreciate and love it? What would you say to your younger self, and maybe just anybody younger in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to answer this in two parts, because what I would say to my younger self is one of the things I talk about in the book is I was like 5'8" in the third grade. I was bigger than all the other kids at a very young age, and was like not self-conscious about being tall, but was like self-conscious about my size in general. So like, oh, if I'm going to be tall, then I should be skinny like a model, not like tall and big, because that wouldn't be appropriate, right? And in my mind, that was my line of thinking. So I think if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would just let my younger self know that, for one, like we all look different, and that is like the beauty of our shared human experience, that none of us are created to look the same. And I'd also tell myself that, like, trust me, in 20 years from now or 30 years from now, you're going to understand that how you look is not the thing that makes you important. It's not the magic that you have to share in the world. And I think for younger generations, I think it's a little bit more nuanced and more complicated, because I didn't grow up with social media, right? I didn't grow up with these images in my face. And so for younger generations, I think it's 1,000 times harder than it was for me.
Yes.
Because at least for myself, right?
Sure.
Right. And even though I was an adult, like even when I look at social media, I have to remind myself, like, everything you see is not real, right? Like this is Photoshop.
Yeah.
As an adult, I have to tell myself that.
The angles.
The kids, the angles, like all the things, right? But I don't think kids have that understanding, because they're growing up with social media, right? And they're seeing it from the time they're like young to now, and it's very much part of the reality. So for younger kids, I think it's even more challenging. And what I think that I would say to younger generations is to just, as much as possible, stay grounded in their uniqueness. And I think there is something so beautiful about being uniquely who you are, and being okay being different. And like, I think, Dan, you spoke to this, like, or maybe you didn't, I don't know, but you go on social media now and you see like all these bodies that are very much manufactured to look the same. And we are not supposed to all look the same. There's something so beautiful about being comfortable in who you are and owning your own skin. And I think that the thing that makes us in actuality, I think that the thing that makes us most confident in the long run is the ability to just accept and embrace the bodies that we are in and be unapologetic about that. Because again, the in body is always changing, and if we don't come to this place of like, this is who I am and I'm going to own that unapologetically, we will literally spend the rest of our lives trying to shape shift into whatever the new in body is. And that's a never ending cycle.
It's never ending. I mean, I feel like I learned a really strong and hard, and I'm still learning a very difficult lesson after my body changing drastically after having my first child and always being athletic and in a smaller body my entire life. And then when I had my baby, I was like, oh, I have like all this muscle memory and my body just snap right back like Kim Kardashian. And that's just going to be my life because you're on, I mean, even for new moms, like you just see these famous people in 3 months, they're like better than they were before. And you're just like, okay, like that is a possibility. That's going to be my outcome because I do all these things that they say they're doing. And then when you don't get that outcome doing all the things they say they're doing and not really saying all the things that they're doing, you know, it's like you have to start being realistic. And as an adult, like even for like, I can't imagine for children and teenagers what that experience is like. But even as an adult, I had to be like, this is not the truth. Like, this is not the whole picture. Like, yeah, you're working out and eating veggies, but you're also going to go get a little nip tuck. You also have all these machines that tighten your skin and do all these things. You have a nutritionist. Like, you forget to look at the whole picture, and it can help distort our own image from not looking at someone else's whole picture. So, I mean, it's really an important conversation to keep having over and over again until we can all understand. And I think that's why these kind of conversations where I think most people would consider uncomfortable are important to kind of be able to ask questions to different people to get an understanding. Like sometimes I feel like you're not even allowed to ask questions anymore about anything that you don't understand because then it's some kind of phobia that you didn't even know you had when you're just curious. Like, I think I was watching an interview and it was an older lady and she was just like, I don't comment because I don't understand and I don't want to offend anyone by my lack of understanding, but I want to understand. So it's like this cycle of like ignorance that we get in because it's like, okay, well, I want to ask, but then if I ask, is it going to make me sound, you know? So I just appreciate you for having this conversation and being so open and, you know, helping people gain a better understanding of how they should be showing up for each other and for themselves so that we can have a world where we just feel comfortable in our skin. Like we all feel so much better when we're comfortable in our skin. You can tell when we all want to be that person comfortable in their skin, no matter what size they are. Like when I watch Lizzo, I'm just like, this girl is it. Like, how can I want to feel like that. Like, I want to be like that. I want to be that confident. I want to walk out the house and not give a damn about this pudge or this back roll or, you know, like, we all admire it. And it's just unfortunate that we tend to shame and try to drag down the things that we really want to aspire to be. So I just really appreciate this kind of conversation so that we can open up the dialogue to be better people about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you for having me. I think, you know, we've covered so much. And I also wanted to comment on what you were saying too about this concept of like snapping back after pregnancy. I think one of the things that is harmful about celebrity culture now too is that celebrities aren't transparent. Like half of these celebrities are literally having their bodies done right after the baby at the same time, you know?
And it's like they act like they are transparent though.
Yes, but they're not, right? And so there's just so much, like there's so many things we could go into that conversation, but like just really understanding that so many of the things we see aren't what they appear to be. And so when we are like measuring ourselves against these standards, like we don't actually even know what they're doing. And so it's like never realistic for us to try to attain that.
Yeah, at all. Yeah, I learned that the real hard way.
So Chrissy, where can we stay connected? Where can we get the book? All the things.
Yeah, so I am on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at I am Chrissy King. Website is chrissyking.com. And the book is available anywhere books are sold.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Danny, where can we stay connected with you?
You can stay connected with me at the Danny Bordeaux. Bordeaux is BOURDEAU. You can follow us at Triggered AFPC on Instagram. You can go to triggeredafpodcast.com to stay up to date with everything we have going on with our latest episodes. You can also go to triggeredafevents.com to see all the live events that we're coming to a city near you with so that we can interact and go deeper with our healing and make sure that we're providing you with the tools and the resources that can really take your healing to another level.
Absolutely. And all over Beyonce's internet, Alicia Reese, ALECHIAREESE. And until next time, see you later, Trigger Happy fam. Bye.